Hi, good morning. I'm Gurdeep Pall. I'm the General Manager in the Real-Time Collaboration Business Unit at Microsoft. Sorry, we're starting about 5 minutes late. We had some badge-related complications. Real-time collaboration, it's not a new area for Microsoft. We've had various efforts in this area in the past. You might be familiar with NetMeeting, Exchange Conferencing Server, Exchange Instant Messaging. We've had some telephony-related projects. TAPI is one of the APIs we've had for a while. We had TAPI 3, which is more to do with H323-based telephony. In most of these efforts, there were some deficiencies which didn't give us the right platform on which we could build the kind of solutions we thought were very interesting and which we believed in fundamentally as being productivity drivers for the next decade. So about 2 years ago, we started an effort to sort of rethink real-time collaboration and what are the basic elements of real-time collaboration, and we invested in building the right platform. Last year, we started looking, we said, great, now we have a platform on track. What are the key solutions we need to have in place where we see a lot of adoption, where we see a lot of potential? And we ended up looking at some companies in the web conferencing space, and we made a purchase of Placeware earlier this year. So Real-Time Collaboration Business Unit is a collection of not only the acquisition, some of the new efforts we had in this space on the platform side, some of the legacy products we have in this space. For once, they're all in one group. And so we've got the legacy, the present, and the future. So today, actually, I'm going to divide my talk in roughly two parts. The first part is going to be more about the vision of how we see the real-time collaboration space, what are the basic tenets we're using as we move forward. And then the second part of the talk will be more here and now in terms of what are the products we have in place, what are the platforms we have, what are the opportunities are, from a partner standpoint. So if you look at, the life of an information worker, that's basically dictated with some verbs. You create information, you share information, you absorb information, you make decisions. And over the years, we've obviously made a lot of progress on authoring tools, tools which allow us to make decisions, etc. And we've made some progress in the area of communication and collaboration, particularly in the area of asynchronous collaboration. I'm not suggesting that we have the ultimate solution in place, but certainly if you look at email, it's become a lot more sophisticated. There's this concept of spaces. SharePoint is a great example of that. There's some really innovative solutions from companies like Groove, etc., where you can make asynchronous collaboration happen really well. But if you look at from a productivity standpoint, there's still a long ways to go. When especially it comes to synchronous collaboration, being able to access data, multiple people accessing data at the same time, changing data at the same time, that's a huge problem. As you have multiple devices which an information worker deals with on a daily basis, this data may or may not be accessible, may not be in the right format, it's may not have the right security setting, etc. So certainly, a long way we need to go there to fix that, and that's a huge productivity challenge for us, and that also means it's an opportunity. It's fair to say that the information worker today is an isolated information worker. You've given them great tools to do things by themselves, and after that, once they've done what they're supposed to do, they shunt it over to somebody else, and they can look at the data, absorb it, change it, and then give it back to them, and then they can do things with it. It's being able to do things in real time together with multiple people is really, I think, the huge opportunity we have. If you look at just the tools we use for collaboration or working together or getting in touch with each other, there's some fundamental flaws. One is that the phone system is completely unlinked to the PC. If you look at the productivity devices, the PC is a big productivity device, and the phone is a huge productivity device. But today, these are completely two separate entities. The places we brought them together are things like call centers, or fairly niche scenarios, where we've tied the phone and the PC system together so that an incoming notification can be tied to some context related to the person who's calling you, and then you can have a whole bunch of state associated with it, and you can access that state on an ongoing basis. But the reality is, for the rest of us, which is only about 300 million people who fall in this rough categorization, there are no tools like this. It's not easy to share data between applications. There's no concept of having multiple instances of applications working off the same data, which is also a huge problem. How many times, you are on the phone, or you are, in fact, sometimes on IM or email, and you're trying to work on the same data together. Today, the only way you can do that is that you go into a conference room, you hope there's a big screen there, and you project the data, and one person gets hold of the keyboard, and that person's making changes, and the other people are pontificating, right? Also, if you look at for meetings and conferences, the software is sorely lacking. So even if you did decide to get together and work on it together, we don't have this idea that all of us are looking down at the surface, the laptop we have or a tablet we have, and we're working on that, annotating, whatever is going on. We're all craning our necks. I mean, fortunately, this room is slanted, so you don't have to crane your necks. But if it wasn't, you'd all be sitting up at an awkward angle, and you'd be looking at the screen. Instead of this data being spread out, the presentation being broadcast to you, and you're able to make your own notes, you can make your own recordings, you can go back and search for different things people said. So clearly the software for that is also lacking. Contextual routing of communications. Today, communications are, at least if you look at the biggest communication system we have, it doesn't follow you. That's the phone system. You call a phone number, and sometimes the lonely phone in your office will ring while you're sitting in a conference room, or you're sitting at home. The fact that there was a context available that could be tapped into so that you could actually make that communication complete, can reach the person, that context is not being used today. The fact that my free busy information is available, the fact that I'm in a particular conference room at a certain time is not used by the phone system to route important calls to me automatically. So clearly, that's another huge source of inefficiencies for the information worker. And then, the whole archive point is that today we have archives. We have email archives. We all have big email stores, and we can always go back and search those. For IM, you may or may not have an archive, but I bet you it'll be a different archive than your email. And then for phone systems, sometimes you record phone conversations, depending on, I guess it's pretty sensitive nowadays whether you record calls or not. But if you do, I bet that sits in a different store. If you want to issue a query that, I remember that person mentioned something to me sometime, whether it was an email, whether it was an IM, whether it was in a phone conversation, there is no query you could issue which would search all these different communication methods and come back to you with the information. So, clearly a whole lot of gaps and seams which exist inside the solutions today. Our vision in the new real-time collaboration division is to bring 3 different mediums which have established value by themselves and bring them together to have a value which is more than the sum of the parts, than the parts themselves. So voice clearly is the mission critical, the killer app for real-time communications. We all like to talk to people. The phones, which came around 60 years ago, we've learned how to love them, use them, and get fairly productive with them. The screen, the visual information, we went through the character-oriented world and we went into the graphical world. We love the visual information we have. A lot of the web, etc., became successful because people were able to look at information in a very usable way. And then, of course, computation. The fact that we can process information, we can to make decisions, to look at data in different ways, to format it. These 3 modes have established value. When you put them together, we think that there is immense value, and it is a fundamental productivity driver for the information worker. So, simple things like being able to, when you see a person's name on the screen, being able to click on that name and making a phone call to that person, instead of remembering that this person, who happens to be in your office in Georgia in Europe, is actually a 14-digit phone number, which you may or may not remember. Being able to just, when you look at that information, being able to click on it and making a phone call to that person, we think is very powerful. Just one small example. When you are in the call and you're talking to that person, words going back and forth, and you want to bring more fidelity into that conversation. You want to say, well, here, look at this pie chart. There's no way to do that today. Well, I guess there are ways. You could always ask them for their IP address, and then you could start a net meeting session and pray there's only maybe one firewall because you figured out how to traverse one firewall. But huge problems. We really have not made it possible for people to be able to share their screen when they're on a voice call with somebody. So, going and fixing these problems. Figuring out how calls get routed intelligently. I mean, this also comes back to the fundamental point about being able to identify somebody with their recognizable identity. Today, the email ID is a recognizable identity. Sometimes people, collapse email names as they do at Microsoft, and they're sometimes not very legible. But, other companies, people actually use full names, and they add the domain name for that company. And, that's a great identity. That's the email we use by. Fortunately, a lot of the IM systems are now using the same identity, so you can IM people with the same name. You can't call them on the phone with that name. So, fixing those things, once you've got the identity nailed, then being able to reach that person, not reaching the phone or the device which represents that person, but reaching that person, which means having presence information, so where they're logged on, so that the call goes to them as opposed to the lonely desktop phone. Figuring out how communications are archived and indexed. There's a project in Microsoft Research called the RingCam project, which we're looking at right now to see if we can do anything interesting with it from a product standpoint. Some folks in Microsoft Research, they took off-the-shelf components. They took some 3094 cameras. They took some microphones. They literally duct taped them together to create a 360-degree device. They took the input from 3094 cameras, and they stitched the input so that now you had a panoramic view of the different parts, I guess, for the entire room. Then they took some facial recognition technology to figure out where, in that panoramic view, where were the different faces, right? They used that information, and they used directional microphone technology, which is mostly signal processing on the audio signal, and they started pinpointing the beam with directional cameras to where they recognize the face of that person. So with this very simple device, they were able to take the 360-degree view in a room. They were able to get not just fading voice depending on as somebody walks up and down or something, actually track the face as they're walking up and down the room, as I'm going back and forth on the screen, and really create a compelling audio-video collaboration experience. Because they were able to archive, they were able to figure out where the different faces were and who the different speakers were, they now were able to record the audio channel separately for each of the person who they tracked. So what does this mean? So I have whatever happened in that meeting, I have very detailed indexed information which I can go back and access in an interesting way later. For example, if I'm in a meeting and I'm sitting with Bill Gates, and I obviously, looking back, there were 6 other people in the room and 5 were not speaking a lot of sense, but Bill certainly was, I can go back to that meeting and I can just hear what Bill was saying because I have access to that index. Even better, if we have speech signatures which can be derived from speech recognition for different people, I can now apply those speech signatures to each of the people, each of the streams separately. So I have a much higher rate of converting what was being said into words which can then be searched. Okay. So being able to archive, index, and access this information is also incredibly powerful. And then, having multiple instances of applications work on the same data, we think that's really powerful. And so these are the kind of examples of the things which focus us as we're working on the next generation real-time collaboration technologies. And our fundamental belief is that, a lot of these scenarios will increase productivity in a fairly significant way. At a time when, everyone is looking at costs and looking to be more productive, we think this is a great investment. So before I get into the vision itself, here's just sort of a taxonomy slide. You see the location and the time axes, and the quadrant that we're focused on is really the quadrant in the upper left-hand corner there, here, which is somehow integrating the PC and phone. This concept of screen call, data conferencing, web conferencing, the fundamental idea that you have the screen present in addition to the phone channel or the voice channel when you're talking to somebody. Rich presence and instant messaging, and of course some of the video conferencing telepresentation scenario. I'll also touch on this concept of an information agent, which is I think very compelling, but I'll get into it a little bit later. Also some of the work which has been going on in Microsoft Research. So these are the 4 themes I'll get into, and I'll sort of flesh them out a little bit more before we then transition into what are the real products we're doing and what time frame some of the other things come out in. So PC and phone integration, I know some of you are looking at it and say, hey, I know that. It's called CTI. We've done that before. We tried it. We had this little application which sat on the side and allowed me to click on names and make phone calls, and we all used it for 3 days, and then we never went back to it. That's probably true. It's been tried before. We've had belief that this is an interesting thing to do. It does improve productivity. But there were some, I think, fundamental flaws in the way CTI was done before. One was that it was a completely different experience that we thrust in front of somebody's face. It was a new application to learn. I have a 20-month-old son, and just about the time he turned 1 year, he learned how to use a 3x4 dial pad. That's fairly early, you start training people to do that. Now you're saying you're going to switch them over from a device they've learned fairly early in their life, and you're going to give them a completely new application, and you're going to get them to use that to make phone calls? I don't know, that's a pretty hard sell. People don't change their behaviors that easily. So I think that was one fundamental flaw. The second flaw was that I don't think we've gotten to a point where identities are really converged, at least in the way we think about them. If the only identity I had to keep track of was your real name, that'll be great, though there's some conflicts there. A lot of people are Johns and Browns and stuff like that. So, well, let's go with email names. They're fairly universal today, almost as universal as phone numbers. So if I'm able to have the dialing experience key off of your universal identity, I think that's really powerful. We weren't there before when we tried a lot of these CTI scenarios. So what we believe is that you take the experiences like dialing, when you receive a call, etc., and you integrate them into the tools you know and love already, as opposed to creating a completely new experience for you to go into, completely new identity space, etc. You go with existing identities, you go with existing experiences, and you enable the CTI type of scenarios. We think that is the killer combination. So what does that mean? If you see somebody's name in an email, you should be able to click on that and make a phone call to them. That's something I can learn. Today we've done some work, and I'll show you some screenshots of that with Live Communication Server, where wherever you see a person's name in Office 2003, you will see a pawn next to it, which shows their presence. It's great when I'm trying to call somebody, in addition not having to know their 14-digit phone number, being to know if they're online at that time. Because the chance of the communication completing is very high if that is possible. So being able to click on a name wherever you see it, a friendly name or an email name, email identity, we think is very powerful. Small thing will go a long ways. At Microsoft, we use the Intercom PBX. And when I come into work, I see a device on my desk, which does have the 3x4 dial pad, thank God for that. But it also has a whole bunch of weird-looking buttons. And most of them are labeled with these cryptic names like CNV and HLD, etc. I'm supposed to figure out this, have a conference or hold or mute or stuff like that. Anyway, so even if I figured that out, we did an informal study inside Microsoft, and we found that only 8 out of 100 people knew how to conference in somebody. And this is a high-tech company, right? So, what if you could click on 4 names and say, I want to have a conference call? Suddenly, I think a lot more people know how to click on 4 names at Microsoft. They will be able to participate in phone calls. Here's another small example. When a call comes in, you've heard of this as screen pop in CRM scenarios, etc. But why should it be limited to CRM? When a call comes in, once I get a notification that Joe is calling me, I can decide whether I want to talk to Joe right now or not. If I don't want to talk to Joe, I may be a little bit considerate and say immediately put him into voicemail instead of letting him wait for 4 rings. Or if I do want to take the call, when I say accept the call, my Outlook store is mined with all the mails Joe sent me, all the mails I sent to Joe, all the documents Joe sent over to me, all the notes, all the communication, all the times we've had conversations before, and that view pops up, right? Sure beats, trying to balance the phone and then trying to type and search for documents. Again, some basic integration points we think are incredibly powerful. Other scenarios, if somebody, the world is not going to shift to completely presence and people-centric dialing. And we will continue to have PBXs and PBX phone systems. If somebody calls my desktop phone and I'm in a meeting and I think it's an important call, I may direct that call. I'll see a pop-up come up over my IM channel. It says, somebody's calling you. I should be able to click on that and say, well, why don't you redirect this to my cell phone? And then I take the call on my cell phone. This is something we do today. We have a prototype of this being used inside Microsoft. And we built that prototype with about 3 prototype engineers. It's a working prototype. We actually interface into the intercom PBX over IP. And we have about 6,000 people inside Microsoft using that, and we have a queue of 6,000 people waiting to get in on that trial. Because it is so compelling. People who started using this prototype, which, by the way, is not super usable. We didn't spend a lot of time getting the UI right, but we made sure that the identity was right. It was the same identity as your email ID. We made sure the presence was integrated, so you knew that when you decided to call somebody, if they were there, or were you going to talk to their voicemail. We made sure that the one part which you're putting in right now is that if somebody calls you and your presence is offline, the phone system will immediately take that call to the voicemail as opposed to making them wait. So that's sort of the back end piece of it. So, clearly very compelling scenarios. We believe in voice over IP a lot because we think it enables convergence of the experience much more easily than you can do with existing PBXs. But our solutions and the experience that we're trying to enable are not going to be gated on the deployment of voice over IP worldwide. So some of the work we're doing in terms of the experiences, the APIs, and the protocols are being done in such a way that we could use that against existing PBXs as well, in addition to the voice over IP world. And we're working with some of the key PBX vendors as well as some aggregators to make this happen. Our focus is not actively on replacing the phone with a PC. We think in some scenarios that is interesting. In a lot of the hoteling and the cubicle sharing type of setups, it's very interesting. A lot of road warrior scenarios, it's very interesting. Today, this is based on live communication server. When folks from my team are traveling internationally, they don't make expensive phone calls from the hotels and stuff like that. I know with cell phones now, you can roam pretty well globally, but especially before that, it was very expensive. Today, we have data connections. They connect over VPN over to the enterprise, to the corporate network, and they use Messenger. They see I'm online. They make a phone call to me directly onto my PC. We've also done the work so that we allow 5-digit dialing from anywhere by putting an IP to PSTN gateway. So people can call me on my desktop phone even when they are traveling worldwide. So there are some scenarios where the PC is the better phone. We think there are other scenarios where with better codecs, etc., you can get much better even audio quality on the PC today than you can get on the phone. Clearly, lots of challenges, as we try to do that. Some of these we stumbled upon ourselves. Establishing the end user value proposition. People are bitten by their trials and tribulations on CTI, showing that you actually save over time. You do save a lot of time and money and productivity really when you are able to click and make phone calls, or when you receive a call, you get this information presented to you in this rich way. Developing the ecosystem for linking PC and phones together. These are sort of two industries which have evolved over many, many decades separately. And there are different players, different business models, different technologies, different directories, different identities, even different wires until recently. How do you get them to sort of come together without making sure that everyone's interests are preserved? That's really a challenge in this. And then other challenges really enabling all these scenarios without requiring a shift to voice over IP. People will shift to voice over IP at their own pace. Unfortunately, not at the pace which a lot of the telephony vendors thought they were going to do, at least in the late 90s. So the next area, screen call, web conferencing, data conferencing, many different names, but the concept is the same, is that when you are talking or communicating with somebody, with one person or multiple people, you do have a screen available to add richness to that communication. A screen which everybody else can look at, a screen which one or more people can manipulate at the same time. We think this is really compelling information worker value. And that's why we went in with the acquisition of Place, where they had some fundamental technology. They had a solution. We could learn from that solution. We could see how it can be improved. And that's the service which has been branded Live Meeting and is in the market today. Clearly, one of the uptakes we've seen a lot of this technology is following up with prospective leads. Salespeople, if they're able to have a rich conversation with somebody without getting on the plane, especially if it's a very, it's the beginning of a sales cycle, that's very, very effective. Inside Microsoft, we have our T&E budget tends to be pretty big. So, just looking inside as a company, how much savings could we have if you, let's say, just reduce 10% of T&E? If 10% of your meetings could be done with rich tools like Live Meeting, that would be great. So there's immense value here. We don't think, that data conferencing, web conferencing is something which should be limited to these very structured, pre-planned meetings, right? Where something is on your calendar and you've invited people, and you made reservations, and you made reservations on your audio conferencing bridges and so on. That's fine. I think it's valuable. But it's also incredibly valuable in ad hoc, on-the-spot type of communications. If I'm ordering flowers on FTD, 1-800-flowers or something like that, in that call, I want to be able to see the flowers, possibly how the flowers are being arranged. And this wasn't a call which I scheduled, I promise you that. I just picked up the phone, 1-800-flowers. It would be great if the screen pops up right next to me. So our vision really is to really bring this richer fidelity into one-to-one calls as well. Lots of challenges with this as well, right? If you look at getting the screen and the audio, the phone call into the same conversation, today it's two distinct steps. They're completely unrelated worlds. Yeah, you can, with Live Meeting, we're doing some integration so that you can actually tie in your audio conferencing bridge through Live Meeting. You can make it happen, but certainly it's not very helpful when you're in an ad hoc one-to-one calling. So wouldn't it be great if your phone company also gave you this capability that every time you made a phone call, that you had a context you could click on and suddenly bring the screen into that conversation, and both the people on both sides would have that screen. So, getting those pieces in place, being able to navigate all these interesting regulatory and phone company issues and protocol issues, it's a challenge. We're working on it. Creating an integrated server-service offering. The analogy which I like to use is really the PBX system and using the phone networks which are there. When you're inside the enterprise, we all use a PBX. It's more efficient. Sometimes you get better quality. Certainly much cheaper. And then, it's efficient because you do 5-digit dialing instead of 7, 10, whatever. But you still have the ability to go reach somebody outside the enterprise by hooking your PBX into the phone system. Similarly, for data conferencing, web conferencing, you want to have analogs like this. You could decide to have a 4-SIF video because you said, I'm totally happy with key people in my organization because they are CAD designers or usability people or whatever they might be, to be able to have 800 kilobits per second video stream which they're sharing with each other when they are communicating with each other. Clearly, this model doesn't work when you go into the big wide phone system. So being able to have the server model and a service model and being able to connect them and provide that level of fidelity is clearly a challenge. Again, something we're focused on. Providing the right quality of service. Real-time apps are different than other applications. On the web, you can wait and 6 seconds later if the web page loads up, not too bad. Email, if the email arrived, 15 minutes later, you don't care. But with real time, with audio, the sensitivity is anywhere between 150 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds, depending on who you believe. Clearly there's a very stringent timing requirement, which means that for a lot of these experiences, regardless of scale, you want to be able to deliver them within fairly bounded times. Maybe a second. Maybe I'll live with a second for, data collaboration or app sharing. But that's about it. So fairly tight budgets. It's a hard thing to pull off. Clearly a challenge. Again, something we were focused on. And then providing global coverage. It wouldn't be nice if you had a phone system, if you had a phone, which you could only call a subset of people in the world on, it's great that you can call anybody. Similarly, it'll be great if, just the way I ordered 1-800, I called 1-800-Flowers and I looked at flowers, it's when I call my parents in India, I'm able to similarly get a screen which I could use for sharing information. So global coverage is very critical as well. Rich presence and instant messaging. This graphic is a little bit clunky. It didn't come out right. But basically, we are big believers in this scenario. We think that instant messaging is a very interesting communication mode which fits in fairly well between email and phone calls. It also has its own characteristics which makes it better than phone calls and better than email in some ways. But the gem here is actually presence. We think that presence is a fundamental new capability which has come into computing and communications. There is no analog to presence. The previous analog to presence was leaning over out of your cubicle and seeing if John is sitting 3 cubicles away. Being able to do this in a global way, we think is incredibly powerful. Knowing where John is, whether one is knowing where he is from a location point, it's interesting in some scenarios. Very interesting if you are FedEx and John is delivering packages. Knowing whether they're online, offline, whether they want to be reached or they want to snooze in their office. Knowing in extreme scenarios, because John and you work on a very tight project together, what document John is editing at this point can be also very powerful. We think there are incredible scenarios around presence. We've not even started to tap into those. And I think that over the next 10, 15 years, you'll see presence light up some really interesting things, improve productivity in very interesting ways. There's one partner I will talk about later on called Descartes. It's a transportation on-the-spot market company. It's like a service. Previously, they used to work with faxes and emails. If you had to ship salmon from Alaska to Florida, I was going to say Florida to Alaska, but no. Alaska to Florida, you would send a fax. These guys would take that fax, read it, and say, oh, let me match it to people who have shipping companies from Alaska to Florida, or have trucks from Alaska to Florida, or have trains from Alaska to Florida, and try and match them. They would send out these faxes. People would respond with some rates. They would look at lower rates, and they would send back to the person who's trying to ship stuff. Pretty inefficient. Descartes has built a solution with live communication server where you get online, you specify the criteria that I want to ship this much perishable goods from this place to this place. They immediately match you up with 10 people who are online who can do that work for you. You click on that person, a form pops up, you type in your things, a transaction is completed, and that's it. They've reduced this on-the-spot market thing into seconds. They tell me, if you can believe them or not, that by reducing transaction times to so small, that there are incredible efficiencies which come out of that in on-the-spot markets. There's a very large PC manufacturer who's trying to compete with another very large PC manufacturer. Both of them shall remain unnamed. But the first one I mentioned is trying to compete, and this other PC manufacturer has one of the most envied inventory control systems known in manufacturing. And that is their competitive advantage. So this first very large PC manufacturer is now trying to build an inventory control system using presence and live communication server to shrink how they do inventory management. And they think they can squeeze out $600 million in a year by just doing that. You can believe that, you don't have to believe that, but these are the kind of things which become possible with presence. I was listening to somebody a year ago speak, and they talked about productivity and the speed at which you complete transactions as a measure of productivity. They talked about 10,000 years ago, you got your cart out and you set out and you completed a transaction in months. You were able to do that faster. The cars came along, or the trains came along. Now with software and the world being connected, you can complete transactions even faster. With presence, you can complete transactions even faster. So again, a step forward in productivity. There are very interesting presence scenarios. I think what you see today in the market, both on the consumer side and the enterprise, is only the beginning. Our vision for presence is that your presence information is an extensible XML document. You can add a whole bunch of information on it. You can put ACLs in different parts of the XML document. You can put in information, everything about your GPS coordinates to what document you're editing, what your mood is today. And depending on the application, depending on the permissions, depending on the identity of the person who's trying to look at your presence, they may be able to see any of this information. For example, my wife can see what mood I'm in today, but my assistant cannot, or my peers in my group, workspace group can't. So, we believe that we believe so much in this, we will enable presence as a really rich platform that you can build interesting solutions around. I have some scenarios here. Presence isn't just about people. It can be about pure transactions itself. This last scenario I have there is that, I make a reservation for a business flight. And as soon as I make the reservation, that transaction, which can have some state associated with changing state over time, appears in my watch list. And if the flight gets delayed, I get notified, and I can look at that information. When the transaction completes, or when the flight completes, when I land, that disappears automatically. So, being able to create all these different concepts around the basic infrastructure we have, we think is incredibly powerful. Lots of challenges in this area, too. If Metcalfe's law talks about the value of the network increasing with more and more people on that network. Same thing is true for IM network. Phone systems which don't allow you to reach everybody are only marginally interesting. Phone systems reach everybody, or communication systems reach everybody, are very interesting. Unfortunately, IM today are a bunch of clouds. You have the consumer clouds, you have MSN and AOL and Yahoo, and they don't talk to each other. If you try to build applications which work across these different clouds, you are violating licenses. If you look at IM clouds inside the enterprises, they're closed because people are worried about viruses and so on. So how can we create bridges between these different islands so that using a universal identity, I can get to somebody's presence regardless of the network they're on, and depending on the right permissions and privacy and other things which people put in place. So that's clearly a challenge. It's a business challenge. It's a technical challenge. We are certainly committed to kind of fixing these, to fix this problem. Presence and privacy tend to come up as trade-offs, which is probably true. But we certainly don't want to limit product development, design, just keeping the privacy issues in mind. We think that the privacy issues are pivot upon cultural issues, both whether it be from where culturally where you come from, or where you work, the cultures of different companies, different verticals. So we want to give you the knobs, and you can decide how much you want to turn it up and turn it down, and make sure that the product is ready from that standpoint. But that becomes it's one of the challenges as people look at presence and adopting it. And the other key thing is that presence has to light up wherever an identity lights up, wherever an identity is available. So making sure that for the information worker experiences, wherever you see an identity, you see their presence. We think that's a key thing. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is this. It's a conceptual thing called information agent. This work was started in Microsoft Research a while back. But the basic idea is this, is that as we get more and more communication devices, our lives are changing. My life has certainly changed. If I'm not on the phone when I'm driving, in certain states it's not allowed. Over here, they still actually let you do that. I feel like I'm not having a productive day. I've lost an hour of my work day where I've not been able to get some work done. So certainly it's changed my life. It's clearly, which is a positive, that I can get more work done, which means that maybe I'll be spending 1 hour less on the phone when I'm at home, and I can spend that with my wife and kids. But as we have more devices, we are not looking at what are the negative things which come with that, particularly around interruptions, the number of voicemail messages you have to check. When you're trying to call somebody, you don't know which one they'll be reachable on. So this project was actually conceptually done at a way that we have multiple communication channels. How do you make them more efficient? How do you use them more efficient? How do you contact somebody when they are accessible by multiple channels? So They said, well, clearly, if I could expose, a web page or an application to you where you could pick your devices and you could say, well, if my wife calls me, she can call me on any device between this and this time. If somebody else calls me, they can call me on that device, and you can forward it if I'm on vacation. Fairly complicated. We found that even Outlook rules, a lot of people don't use them. They get fairly complicated, right? So what they looked at is how much information is available about you which you don't need to go configure. For example, free busy information. In most enterprises, the free busy information in your calendar is actually published. So I can certainly figure out the times you are available in the office and times you're not available in the office. If a phone comes in and somebody's calling a desktop phone, I could make a very simple decision there. Yeah, I'm going to let the call go through. I'm going to send it to voicemail. It's one piece of information. If I allow some more information to open up, I could say, you can not only see my free busy information, you could see where I am at any point. You could also see the person who's calling me, are they in my reporting structure or not? Do they report up? For example, if Bill Gates is calling me, and if I'm on a conference call designing the holiday party, I think I'll take that call, okay? But some of these decisions can be made fairly easily because the information about the organizational structure is also available on the corporate network. The information about my free busy information is available in the corporate network. To a certain set of people, I allow my calendar information to be visible too. So being able to take these different sources of information and do rich processing on that to make decisions about communications better is certainly, it's a great untapped area. So this group looked at how we can make communication more efficient in this era of new devices. They have a bunch of scenarios. I won't read through those, but one favorite one of mine, which if you believe in Moore's law, and believe in some of the other developments in technology and innovation, we're not too far from this scenario. So it's not a super far-fetched thing. So I'll get into that. So I'm sitting in a meeting, and Bill Gates calls me. The information agent decides that, oh, Gurdeep is in a meeting, and the meeting isn't with somebody I recognize, so I'm going to assume that it's with important customers. And Gurdeep is available on IM because he's got his laptop in front of him. Because we figured out, Bill's pretty important, so we let the call go through, except the call's going to go in as an IM session to me, and Bill's on his cell phone. So I engage in a speech-to-text engine in the path of that call, and I convert in real time. This is where it becomes a stretch, but that's where you have to believe in Moore's law and suspend belief. In real time, I can convert from text to speech. From speech to text, with fairly high level of accuracy in that transform, because I know it's Bill calling, and I can get Bill's speech signatures, so I can recognize the speech better. Comes as text to me, I type in text back. It's very easy to go in real time from text to speech. And now I'm having a conversation between two completely different modes because the information agent was there to create the right bridge. I was talking to folks in Microsoft Research in China. They've done some work where they can process my speech, they can extract signatures from it, and when they convert from text to speech, it sounds like me. So we are slowly moving towards the point where you're going to bridge these communication channels. You need smart agents which can take all this information, put it together, and really create a world which doesn't have seams, communication seams. So anyway, lots of challenges. I won't get into this too much. The cell phone scenario I used was also, there's a big challenge there in that, it is okay using SIP today because that's one of the key technology bets we're making in our whole real-time collaboration investments. I can get the control channel, I can get signals on any phone which is being called. On the cell phone, unfortunately, that isn't the case. I hope the cell phone networks will manifest more call information so that I can build smarts around that for things like information agent. That's clearly a challenge, bringing these different infrastructure pieces together in a way that you can tap into this information. Privacy issues, if I've got my speech signatures, I don't want them in wrong hands. So, having the right kind of DRM or other solutions which can be put into place. And then there's also the complexity of building a system like that. A lot of times you build systems which, work right 95% of the time, and 5% of the time they end up doing really wrong things. And we don't want that to happen. So clearly some challenges there. So that was sort of the vision part of my talk. I'll get into, so what are the things we are doing right now? On rich presence and instant messaging, we have a product called Live Communication Server, which was released actually a few months ago, but was launched a couple of weeks back in New York, along with the rest of the Office system. It's branded as Microsoft Office Live Communication Server 2003. We have a web conferencing product. It's a service. Sorry, it's not a product, it's a service we call Live Meeting, which comes out of Placeware acquisition. And we have some investment areas. Project Istanbul is really the PC and phone integration area I talked about. And we're looking at the Longhorn Wave. The Longhorn is the next major version of Windows to provide the right infrastructure for InfoAgent. As you can imagine, some of the scenarios you and I touched upon, it isn't just about real-time collaboration. It is about information about your calendar, information about your documents, information about communications, about your settings. All those things have to be stored in a schematized way so that then I can bring semantic-less processing to look at this information and to take specific actions. That's really, if you take information agent and you make it completely inorganic, that's what it is. And that's the effort we have in place for Longhorn. Live Communication Server, I'm going to drill a little bit into this area. It's two things. As I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, we evaluated the different real-time communication solutions we had inside Microsoft. And we said, clearly, if you believe the vision, there's a lot to be done for the next decade. You can't do it on, the pieces we had in place. In some cases, we didn't have the right platforms. In other cases, we made the wrong bets on protocols. For example, TAPI3, we made bet on IP solution which relied on IP multicast, and we found that IP multicast, unfortunately, despite the promise, didn't get deployed appropriately. We made bets on some T120 type of protocols for data collaboration. Again, great protocols came out of an incredible gene pool, a lot of good thinking in ITU and so on, but just the way the world has evolved, they just were not good fits. So we invested in creating a platform on which you could build a variety of real-time collaboration solutions. Everything from, this being the basis of a lot of telephony solutions to web conferencing solutions, instant messaging and presence solutions, pure data collaboration solutions. So you can have two instances of Excel, two people working in two different parts of the world on the same version, on same data, using Excel, both manipulating different cells at the same time. So creating the platform for that. Now, you build the right platform, and you go to an enterprise and say, hey, would you like to buy a nice platform? And they say, what? I don't want to buy an API, I want to buy a solution. So we built the first solution on this platform, which is the instant messaging and presence solution. So Live Communication Server is two things. It's the platform on which we're going to build the future of a lot of the vision I talked about, and it is the first solution, which is the enterprise instant messaging and presence. It's built in such, well, one of the key things about the platform is that we made some bets. One of the big bets we made was around SIP. SIP is, if you follow the developments in the voice over IP stage, it's voice over IP area, it's a standard in the IETF, session initiation protocol, which allows you to establish a session, a real-time session between two or more people. One of the things we realized as we went down this real-time collaboration space is that regardless of the type of communication you want to have, there's always one step which is common. Being able to identify somebody, being able to find out how they can be reached, which is mapping their identity to an IP address or to the series of hops which are going to get to that person if you are in a firewall and administrative boundary type of a situation, and then establishing that session. So regardless of whether you're making a voice call or data collaboration call or IM conversation or whatever, you have to do that step. We decided to use SIP for session initiation, and that's what the platform is built on. It's a fairly open approach because you can now add other modes of communication, the data collaboration, audio, video, IM, to that particular session. I have a build problem on the slide, so, okay. So, there are three things we talk about when we talk about live communication server. One is that it allows you to make better decisions faster. This is a value proposition from an information worker standpoint. If you can reach your coworker, firstly, if you know that they're online, and if you can reach them in time, as opposed to reaching their voicemail and they're getting back to you 4 hours after the deadline is over, you will be able to make better decisions, process information in a more efficient way, faster. So that's clearly a value proposition we have. Second is live communication server is built for the enterprise. As we went out building this platform, we wanted to make sure that we are not creating our own identity system. So we tap into a lot of the good work which has happened on DNS. We tapped into the Active Directory to have more formed identities. We tapped into the Kerberos-based authentication systems which exist inside enterprises. So we've created a product which just fits into the enterprise. It fits in, it can be managed using WMI, which a lot of enterprises use. It can be managed using some of the graphical interfaces we have. We support some of the key topologies which enterprises use, crossed forest topologies for Active Directory, for example. We've made it such that you can federate this product and with some add-ons that we are working on right now. So it's designed for the enterprise. It should just fit into an enterprise if you have some of these other pieces that we've talked about. Certainly, if you don't have some of these pieces in place, it's a challenge. But rather than create a product which is nothing but which requires a bunch of providers to fit in to provide the right solution, we said we're going to make a bet on some of these key pieces, and we're going to roll out a solution based on that. And the last part is that this is the platform for not just instant messaging and presence, but a variety of real-time collaboration applications. And I'll get into some of the things which are enabled with this platform. But here's an example. This is Outlook 2003, Office 2003. It shows beta there because the screenshot is before we shipped the product. But you can see that when you see the person, Katie, who sent that mail, you can see a pawn next to her name, and you can see the presence. And you can send an instant message to that person if they're online. You can even make phone calls with some other pieces which need to be fitted in the back. But now, Katie doesn't have to be my buddy, doesn't have to be on my buddy list. I can still see her presence instantaneously, because it's not that I won't have a buddy list of 3,000 people, because 3,000 people can send me mail at any point in the day. It's just that when I open that mail, for a person who's not my buddy, I can see their instantaneous presence. I can't actively watch it, because that requires permission from Katie, but I can at least see the instantaneous presence. What you see at the lower right-hand corner is the SharePoint site, where you see all the people who have permissions to access that site, and who's online, who's not online. Again, assuming that SharePoint sites happen around projects, around teams, it's good to know. It could be a virtual team. People are not on your buddy list, but are part of your team, being able to know whether they're online or offline. So certainly, having that information available to you wherever you need it most. This Word example is my favorite. You can type in someone's name in Word, and you can see their presence right there. Because Word will parse the names, look them up against your address book, and map that to your identity, and then look up the presence. This also we think is incredibly powerful. What's not enabled in Outlook, in Office 2003, but it's imminent, is that when you look at a lot of large documents, especially if you look at those legal documents, there's a whole bunch of changes, and 25 different people have changed them and edited them and written stuff which you don't understand. So you can hover over a paragraph, and it'll tell you who's written that. You can show you the presence of the person who wrote that. If they're online, you can click on it and get a clarification right there. So these are the sort of the really embedded experiences, and same thing you see with Excel, that in the shared workspace panel on the right, you can see all the people who are at the SharePoint site where this document resides and so on. So this is the kind of integration of presence we started on, and we expect a lot more integration in the future for a lot of the information worker scenarios. I'm putting a slide up to see who are the partners for Live Communication Server today. I don't think the next time I talk to the slide, I will have every partner here. We've run out of real estate. But I'll go through some of these partners to sort of show you the variety of solutions which can be built on this platform. You see Siemens, NEC, and Mitel here. And these are, you recognize them as fairly mature telephony companies. They are building IP PBX solutions based on live communication server. The fundamental shift which is happening in telephony, of course, there's whole voice over IP shift, but the voice over IP shift failed to articulate one huge change. And the change is that with voice over IP, you don't have to think about phone numbers and people or devices which represent the people. You can think about people's identities themselves. And you can think about the presence, and you can do intelligent call routing based on the presence, wherever the person is, as opposed to their lonely desktop phone. So that shift it's been recognized by all the leading players. Some of them have figured out that we have a platform which they can use, and that in the enterprise there's going to be only one authoritative source of presence, whether it's ours or whether it's from one of our competitors, but it's not going to be multiple of them. It doesn't make sense. And they're working with us to build this IP PBX solution on top. Clearly, there are companies like FaceTime, Logic, who build compliance solutions. Every time you have communications now, depending on the vertical you're in, and with the new HIPAA laws, pretty much wherever you are, whenever there's electronic communication, there's logging required and stuff like that. And there's compliance functions, NASD, SEC compliance in the financial area. So there's some financial compliance solutions which have been built on this product. Reuters. We did a release of live communication server for Reuters last year, just for that company. They've built a global network for securities trading. Well, they have 300,000 people who signed up, or whatever, I don't know the exact number, but basically 300,000 people have the ability to do securities trading globally over this network. They run it 24/7. They run out of 2 data centers worldwide. And in addition to logging functions which can happen at the boundary of the enterprise, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, etc., they also log in the network as part of the service they provide, so that the regulators can come and look at and access information about all the different communications which happened and all the different trades which happened. So to give you an example, secondary bond markets, trading is happening on the Reuters network. So here's another service provider. Sabardi, McAfee, they've built antivirus solutions on top of live communication server, so that if you're doing instant messaging and you use a word which is profane or whatever, that can actually be scrubbed out of the communication. If you send a virus using this channel, it goes to the virus processing thing. They scrub the virus out. They send notifications to the administrator. They send it to the sender, to the receiver. So variety of solutions. I talked about Descartes and their on-the-spot market service which they've built. They're on here as well. And variety of other partners. PeopleSoft did a press release a few months ago that they're integrating their suite on top of present solutions which we have. Goodwill Technologies. This used to be called Dr. Goodwill before. But they've basically built this a virtual doctor visit solution. It's pretty interesting. We don't have to wait to go see a doctor and physically walk over. You can actually schedule an appointment and have a virtual visit. And we're using live communication server, using the audio video capabilities and the whiteboard capabilities. They've created, firstly, a software solution, so you can just schedule. In fact, one of the local hospitals here is doing the trial where you can actually go on the web, schedule a doctor appointment, and then just have a virtual doctor visit. But they've taken it a step further. They're working with the TrendWest, which is, you might recognize it as a resort company where you can buy timeshares and stuff like that. They're going to have kiosks in every timeshare, in every resort. And if you fall sick or your son sort of hurts their knee or something, you don't have to travel 65 miles when you're in a remote part of Mexico to find a doctor. You can actually be connected back through that kiosk to a centrally run service, and you can have a virtual doctor visit. So a variety of solutions spanning a variety of different things. Fenestra, you might recognize these guys. They're a European company. They built a 2-way SMS gateway between live communication server, so you can actually go from your cell phones. The Misa Group, which is a very well-known translation software company, they've built it so that if I'm having an IM session with somebody who speaks a different language, you invite a bot into that conversation, which can translate in real time for you, for everybody. So clearly, these are the partners we have. We hope to have more. We think that, like the internet, which is sort of a non-real-time client-server-based thing, the value of these solutions just goes up more and more as more and more partners build on it, without requiring, totally different infrastructures, different APIs, different protocols, etc. So, in conclusion, I guess I have some time left, but we are strong believers in the fact that you can bring voice, screen, and computation together for fundamentally increasing fundamentally increasing productivity. We believe they need to come together in a consistent and extensible way. Every time we create a new collaboration solution, we shouldn't be building the whole stack from bottom to up. We need to agree on, just the way on the internet, we all agreed that IP was the standard we were going to use. We all agreed that TCP was the standard we were going to use. We all agreed that HTTP was the way we were going to use. And then the value just exploded above HTTP. In the same way, getting the platform elements right, picking the right protocols is the right way to go. We believe that collaborative solutions are not silos. They're not these stacks. We believe that there's a very horizontal layering, and that's where the efficiency of solutions, etc., comes from. And we believe that there's a convergence, not just of, as in voice over IP, we talked about convergence of the infrastructure, but convergence of experiences, convergence of platforms, convergence of infrastructure. And that's the key cornerstone of our vision. That's it. Great, thanks. I have some time, so if I can take some questions. Yes?
What is happening in the area of video conferencing with many-to-many?
So the question is, what's happening in the area of video conferencing with many-to-many? Well, there is certainly a lot of solutions which the video conferencing vendors are providing, and they're working on the many-to-many type of solutions, and there's mosaics and other type of ways they've come out for solving that problem. I think that they will. If you narrow the problem down to just that scenario, where you go into a conference room and there's a video conferencing equipment, and you're talking to 4 other rooms around the world, and you're stitching the images together, I think the solution, you can actually solve that problem. I think the challenge is this. The challenge is not everyone who's in that meeting, if it's a virtual meeting, the meeting should come to me as opposed to me going to the meeting. I shouldn't go to the conference room because I need to be in a meeting with 4 other people who are somewhere else. I should be just sitting in my office. So how do I come up with a solution which is not restricted to these conference room solutions, so it ties into my desktop conferencing, and yet you're able to stitch that experience together? I think that's where the challenge is. So yes, there's a lot of actually standards work. There's a lot of innovation happening inside these silos. I don't believe it is happening in a way that it can be inclusive of the individual who's sitting in their office or at home who wants to participate in that conference.
So what's happening in that scenario?
That scenario is something, we're certainly beginning to look at that. We are doing a bunch of work in the video side, both on codecs and in terms of how these MCUs can be constructed. The scenario I gave you, the ring cam, was actually quite interesting. Of course, that gives you a panorama in one room, but now you have multiple panoramas you work with. It's something we're looking at. It's not something which is imminent for us, but it's part of our, some of the things we're doing on the video side. Yes?
I've been using IM a lot for both my product and my personal use within my company. And as I was trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together in your message program, the difference between you and MSN, I understand completely now, but the message seems really vague and confusing. Are you planning to fix that?
Right. So the question is, for folks who couldn't hear that, is that Jeffrey?
Yeah.
Jeff uses IM in his personal life and at work, and they're 2 different systems. And just for Microsoft, we have the enterprise solution and we have MSN. And how do these come together? The messaging has been pretty vague, confusing. So basically, MSN team they took the lead in coming up with a way that enterprises can connect into the MSN cloud. they're offering this service called, or this, I guess it's a product, but it's really like a service called MSN Connect. The way MSN Connect works is that if you sign this agreement, the first thing you get is that you can reclaim all the passports which are issued with your company's name. Because today, you know, with easy passports, I can go get a passport. Which company do you work for, sorry?
Iteration Software.
I can be Jeff at iterationsoftware.com. I can get a passport issued. So the first thing they'll do is reclaim all the passports, so they rationalize the identity problem. And then they give you a pipe, a secure pipe, which runs from the enterprise into MSN, and they will only allow people with that identity, with that suffix, to come through that pipe. So they created the solution which is going to allow federation. They charge on a per-user basis. And today, you need a third-party gateway that sits between LCS and MSN. But that's because they're two completely different protocols being used. Next year, MSN will have a SIP head on the service. So you'll be able to federate directly from LCS into MSN without requiring a third-party gateway. So but you would have to subscribe to MSN Connect in addition to the LCS product.
Yeah, I've actually over the last week or two learned all of this stuff. I just wanted to mention that it is still confusing. I got it, but the messaging is so strange because there are really two places that are keeping presence, and that's just difficult to deal with. And I know when I go into a customer and are going to explain why they're going to want LCS, I have to go through this whole description about how MSN fits into this and why you're still using Windows Messenger and MSN Messenger. And I think you guys, please make it one if you possibly can.
That's great feedback. Obviously, this is an area where we've spent a lot of time internally as well. The challenge is, if you tell MSN that they're going to be hamstrung by the enterprise scenarios to when they compete with AOL and Yahoo, it's a hard thing to sell to them, as you can imagine. As far as the presence case is concerned, especially next year, there will be a single authoritative source of presence depending on the identity. If it's an enterprise presence, it won't be stored in MSN. It'll come through the federated link, and that's how you get to the presence. So we'll figure that out. I take your feedback on the messaging thing. I think we can do a lot better. I get a lot of, I feel pretty good about the fact that at least we can do this. With AOL and Yahoo, I can't even get a connection.
I have a wonderful vision.
So, yeah, but I take your feedback. We've heard it before, and we need to do better than.
Can I make another comment?
Yes.
Maybe it's feedback, but I'd be curious about the people who encounter this. Our company is distributed, and we really like IM. We use Presence a lot, and we really like the voice that I can do, the camera, and the app sharing. Wonderful thing. We all bought cameras. And after a little while, we found that because not all the time, we're not always on VPN, and there's different VPN clients that sometimes work and don't. We've all felt that way. What ended up happening was that the point-to-point communication scenarios were a crapshoot. I couldn't rely on them, and we dropped it. I have, 40 cameras gathering dust because when I wanted to establish a video conference or a webcam or whatever it is today, I didn't know if it worked. So I found alternatives. And I understand the technology point-to-point and why going to a server is going to have all kinds of bandwidth issues and increase things. But the fact is that we can't use it because it's not 100% there.
You're absolutely right. And this is as you require somebody to make a fundamental shift in how they rely on technology and innovation, if it doesn't work all of the time, most of the time they will go back and never come back to it. And that's a huge issue. It's a network infrastructure issue, but it affects us significantly. We're looking at a couple of approaches for that. One is that, if you've got to count on something. You've got to count on the fact that I can at least have a one-way out of my enterprise or my firewall using TCP. You've got to count at least on that. That's the least common denominator. You can do more things beyond that. So one of the things we're looking at doing is how we can even take some of the media and put it over TCP. Now, I know many of you are balking at this because when you try to retransmit a packet, an audio packet which was said 5 seconds ago, that's not super useful. But we don't have a choice. So we are working on a solution where how you can take possibly multiple TCP sessions and come up with interesting ways of sending media across them, just so that you can get out of a firewall. And then you have boxes in the DMZ, etc., where you can terminate this call and then have a managed traversal back into your firewall. There are too many better solutions, unfortunately. It's very hard. I actually came from Windows Networking. I managed the Windows Networking group there, and I've done that for 12 years at Microsoft. And it is such a hard problem, just solving these basic network traversal issues. We've invested significantly in IPv6, and in fact, there's some really cool applications coming out now with IPv6. The problem is I can figure out how to do IPv6 behind NATs. When it comes to firewalls, I still have the administrator sitting there locking down ports, and the first thing they tell you is, oh great, so you want me to tunnel IPv6 over v4, so you want me to open a hole in my firewall to allow any IPv6 traffic to come into my enterprise, right? So it's a real problem. I hear you. It's a challenge for all of us, I think, in the industry to try and tackle that. Absolutely. Yes.
If I wanted to use the Microsoft IM client, right, not necessarily the MSN public version inside the enterprise, and I didn't have like LCS, are there other alternatives? I mean, are there any plans like put SIP into Windows 2003 or next version to allow me to have just internal connectivity?
So we have, the question is, will there be other clients available for live communication server, or is it SIP?
SIP. For example, the company isn't ready to invest in live communication server, but they just want the IM client, right?
But
internally.
Right. Well, what service or server they're going to use for that IM client?
Well, hopefully you put SIP just in the operating system.
Well, no, there isn't a presence store which is part of the operating system. There is a SIP proxy you can get, but that's not sufficient to give you the entire IM solution. You need to have a database which is the authoritative source of your presence, and that is with live communication server. There are ideas about peer-to-peer presence and stuff like that, which are interesting. There's some cool things out there, but nothing which is sort of usable in an enterprise sort of way. For example, in your company, if you do peer-to-peer IM solution, let's say if one existed, you would need to have a way to do HIPAA compliance on that. So now you need to log a peer-to-peer based solution that can be looked at, so it becomes a huge problem. So that's sort of a challenge we have right now, right? That you do need to have a server or a service to get IM in presence. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time.